The title is A Mob of Rebels Read the Report. We're in Numbers 14. You know what has been previous to this chapter is they picked the 12 spies. They went in and they looked at Canaan, and they came back with a bad news report. Well, the children of Israel had decided they were going to improve on God's plan. And we do that too. You know, he tells you, this is what I'm going to do. Now, the children of Israel knew their destiny was to capture Canaan. They knew that from the very beginning. So they're not trying to do something that wasn't in God's plan. But they just wanted to tweak it so they felt comfortable with it. We'll feel comfortable if we get to go over there and preview it first. That was their plan. You don't get that out of Numbers. You get that from Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy chapter 1, he says, you came to me and begged me to do this. And I said, go ahead. When the report comes back for the children of Israel, it's a real disappointment. The basic premise to the report is this: no human has the power to take that land. It's just beyond ability. Now the question is this: had they outgrown God? No human was able to do what they had done, crossing the wilderness there, going through places without water, taking water that was bitter and nobody could drink it and turning it into something that was drinkable, getting manna, shoes that didn't fall apart. I mean, the list just goes on and on. That wasn't humanly possible either. But they went over there and took a look at Canaan from a human standpoint, and decided it's beyond our control and we've outgrown God, so, that's not part of the plan. Let's look at our passage. It's going to be Numbers 14, and we'll be in verse 1. Numbers 14, verse 1. We're just going to go down to verse 5. This is a really different message than I normally do. I don't normally do things like this, but today I'm not going to give you hardly any cross-references. If you want some cross-references, you think them up yourself. We're just going to look at probably a max of 10 verses today and just study them and think about it. Sometimes we get so many verses we don't think about the ones we got. So we'll just look at a few verses and just think about it. Numbers 14, verse 1. And all the congregation lifted up their voice and cried, and the people wept that night. And all the children of Israel murmured against Moses and against Aaron. And the whole congregation said unto them, would God that we had died in the land of Egypt, or would God we had died in the wilderness. And wherefore hath the Lord brought us unto this land, to fall by the sword, that our wives and our children should be a prey? Were it not better for us to return into Egypt? And they said one to another, let us make a captain, and let us return unto Egypt. Then Moses and Aaron fell on their faces before all the assembly of the congregation of the children of Israel. In this chapter we see the immediate effect of an evil report. You'll find an evil report throughout your day. Life happens and you get an evil report. So let's see what happens in the natural with an evil report. The first thing we see with the evil report is mental distress. It has an effect on you. Mentally, your brain goes haywire. Mental distress. That's where they are. He says here, all the congregation lifted up their voice and cried and wept, and they did this all night long. Now, the Jews were already a very dramatic people. So when you give them something to actually be dramatic about, you can just imagine the volume goes from 10 to 100. So here they are. The whole nation, with very few exceptions, was stricken with dismay and grief. They spent all night lamenting, weeping, making a big production of it. It was universal. It was all of them. Look at it. In verse 1, he says, and all the congregation. Verse 2, and all the children. After the colon, the whole congregation. Now, that's not saying that every individual did. It's saying, as a whole, All of them. There were more that did than that didn't. We know Joshua and Caleb weren't doing it. We know Moses and Aaron weren't doing it. So there were some that were not. But as a whole, generally, everybody was involved in this thing. That tells you where the crowd is. The distress was unrestrained. They didn't put any restraint on it. They just gave themselves liberty to vent. Have you ever heard this? I'm sure you have. People say the best thing for you to do when you're feeling distressed is you need to vent. Let it out. No, don't let it out. It might not be good. If it's not good, don't put it out. That might be poison. Why would you share poison with the public? Not a good idea. This was unrestrained. It says they lifted up their voice and cried. I thought crying was lifting up your voice. Lifting up your voice means they put some words with it. And we've read the words they were saying, probably saying even more words. They didn't just stop with, I'm upset. They went on to, here's why I've been done wrong. They felt like they'd been done wrong. They'd come all this way. It's been 40 years, almost 40 years. And they're at the border, and they say, we can't do it. It's impossible. It was a wasted trip for 40 years. This is childish and cowardly to throw a temper tantrum. That's what they're doing, temper tantrum city. They're giving their feelings an out. Feelings have to be put in check. It's okay to have feelings because you can't do anything about it. You're going to have feelings. That's just part of being human. However, to allow feelings to become the controller, that's not right. You still control what the feelings limits are. Maybe I'll say it that way. He says, this is something that someone said, Lord Lytton. Only when men weep, he should be alone. When a man weeps, he should be alone. Okay, so, and this is, historically, men don't cry in public. And that's always looked down on. When I was a kid, it was. I don't know about nowadays, but back when I was a kid 6,000 years ago. Not because tears are weak, but because they should be sacred. They should mean something. Tears are akin to prayers. The Pharisees prayed publicly, and they paraded it. But the imposter parades tears. Look at the politicians. You know, when they mess up and they come to the public, and you know that they don't care. They're just trying to push votes. And the big crocodile tears come out. Just because somebody's crying doesn't mean it's legitimate. And just because you cry does not mean you've got the right. You may not be right. Just because you've produced tears doesn't mean much. Tears are not always fruitful. They're hot drops, sometimes only scorch the cheek and dim the eye. Weep not too fondly, lest the cherished grief should turn into vain self-pity. Weep not too long, but seek divine relief. Weep not too fiercely, but let the furnaces burn. It is not tears, but teaching we should seek. Tears that we need are gentle showers. They mold in the beginning, then stain the cheek, freshening the spirit into life and power. Now, if you weep before you and God, just you and God, that might have something that will produce a change in your life. Most people weep before men to change men. That doesn't matter because men are going to change. You might affect the change you wanted, but just give it a few minutes and they'll be changed on their own. Don't count on men's change to stay secure. You know, we're so fickle, we don't even know what things we like. We like one thing and then just give it a few years and we don't care for that anymore. God is eternal. He doesn't change. So if we can get on the same page with Him, we don't have to worry about the constant changing. Not only that, their distress was unrighteous. That's the main problem, is it was sinful. It was unrighteous. Now, you may be sad about something. You may shed some tears, and you may have great disappointment, and your hopes be dashed. However, the fact is this: if it's righteous, you're good. If it's unrighteous, get rid of it, and do it quickly. All of life should be boiled down into, is it holy or is it sin? Two categories. If it's right, get on board and multiply it. If it's wrong, get rid of it quickly. Their distress is unrighteous. It sprang basically from disbelief, unbelief in God. That's why they did this spy thing to begin with. They said, I didn't pull up the references, you can find it yourself. In Deuteronomy 1, they come in and they say, let us go spy out the land so that we can know which way we go in. That was all they were supposed to be doing, was finding the proper path. They came back and they said, we can't do it because there's big boys over there. You know, Shoney's are all over the place. The big boys got the big sandwich everywhere we looked. Therefore, we can't go. That was not the premise they were moving for. They were going over there to find out which direction, what trail are we taking. But they didn't believe God to begin with. They figured, you know, he's done enough for us at this point, it's our turn. Instead of just leading us every time, we're at the land now. Now it's our turn to do a little bit of leading. The reports of the spies were opposed to the Word of God. Once they decided it's a no-go, they should have looked at that in comparison to what God said. God said, you're going to take the land. I'm going to send you in. So for them to say, but we can't do it anymore, they should have looked at the two. One's true, and one lines up with what I think and I feel. And you decide which one you've prioritized, and that's who's God. They even accepted the cowardly opinions of the 10 bad spies, rather than relying on God. They've had a history with God. They haven't had a history with any of these 10 spies doing any miracles for them. The 10 spies didn't light up, the night sky to lead them. The 10 spies didn't produce a cloud during the day to shade them. That wasn't their job. But suddenly they're in their face, and we can view them as humans. Oh, there's a light. We can view them as legitimate reality in their minds. Their cries and their tears expressed cowardly fear. That's what it really was. Those teardrops weren't saying we're trying to get right with God and we're in a case that we need God's help. They were saying, I'm a coward and I'm afraid. That's what they really said. Their coward fears rose from their unbelief in what God had already promised them. Their cries and tears proclaimed sin and shame. That's what those teardrops said. Now, the problem is this. There's a lot of people who should have shame that don't have shame. And they should have some shame. Now, these people were wise enough to know, look, I'm embarrassed. We've wasted 40 years. Now, it wasn't a waste. That's where their thinking was wrong. But at least they had some sort of a regret, even if it was wrong. Nowadays, people don't regret anything. Okay, well, that in and of itself is wrong. Sin is intended to bring a man shame. The next thing we see is manic delusion. That is craziness gone to the extreme. What they've done in this passage is they go on and they give vent to their emotions. And their emotions begin to create their own illusions about the future. Look at it in verse 2, Numbers 14:2. And all the children of Israel murmured against Moses and against Aaron. Okay, that's unreasonable. They cry out because they dread death, as though Moses and Aaron are the death angel. They're not controlling this. These people all volunteered to follow Moses and Aaron. They didn't have to. They could have stayed in Egypt. They chose to follow. Start blaming somebody, they need to pull out a mirror. But no, they're murmuring at Moses and Elijah, or Moses and Elijah. Y'all have a job keeping up with all these Bible characters. Moses and Aaron. They wish they had died in Egypt or in the wilderness. Really, you really wish you had died in the wilderness? You really wish you had died in Egypt? No, they're just saying things. They're trying to be extreme to prove a point. The problem is something is motivating those words, and it's satanic. That's not what God wanted for them. If God wanted them to die in Egypt, he sure could have killed them in Egypt. If he had wanted them to die in the wilderness, he would have killed them. He ends up doing that. The old saying is this: there's nothing to fear but fear itself. Well, that's a bunch of baloney, but I mean, the basic premise of it is that fear causes its own fear. And it does. It multiplies. It's like they say, cowardice is epidemic. You know, you find one person that's a coward and gets afraid, and it starts spreading. Everybody else starts getting afraid. It sets an atmosphere. And that's what's been going on in the camp here. They wished to die because they were afraid of dying. I mean, just go on in there. If you're going to die anyway, die doing something. They wished to die because they were afraid of dying. There's no reason or nobility in their conduct. They just say, we're going to die, let's go back someplace that we're used to and die there. When these 10 spies brought back their evil report, it spread depression amid this sensitive crowd. They're already sensitive because they've been given to emotion. And now they get a bad report, and that just pours fuel on the fire. And so here we go. Everybody's trying to heighten the next person they hear. You know, they're all trying to outdo the other one. And they're doing a good job of it. Now imagine if it was not a crowd, but it was individuals. If each individual had to go into the tent and reason with the 12 spies, then come out, we would have had a different result. Individually, you make your brain work usually. Individually, just by yourself, you and God as a Christian, you'll work through some things that you wouldn't be able to do in a group. Here, the big crowd is motivating the crowd. And so, the motivation is insanity. The crowd has its own reasons. And it becomes peer pressure almost. It seems like they would have had a little bit more common sense individually than they did as a group. As a group, they default to the lowest common denominator, not the highest reasoning order. The crowd, that's the crowd. The crowd's usually no good. Stay out of the crowd. A crowd once excited defies reason and rationale. Look at the mobs historically. They've all done that. We've recently seen mobs in America. Those idiots are doing stupid stuff. They're busting up their own neighborhood businesses. That's where they get goods. Do you think when they steal stuff off the shelf and then they need to go buy something that the price is going to be what it used to be? No, it's going through the roof. The store's got to recoup that some way. And if they think that stealing is going to put money in their pocket, they're crazy. It's going to raise inflation. But that's because there's no rationale in a mob. It's mob mentality. When they heard the news, they forgot God was with his people. Now this is easy to do. They forgot there's somebody bigger than human involved in this thing. And for us, that's a fact. Whatever you're facing, you don't face alone. If you're saved, he says, lo, I'm with you always. With you. That is, I didn't leave, I don't take a break, and I don't go on vacation. I'm with you. So really, we don't have any fears. I mean, we let them come in from time to time, and we entertain them. We shouldn't, because God's bigger than all of that. They forgot God's promises. God had already promised them, you're going to get that land. It's going to be flowing with milk and honey. You're going to get fields that you didn't do anything for. You're going to get houses you didn't build. I'm going to let you have it all. Sounds like goodies. Well, if it's been promised, then the promise is only as good as the person who promises. You know, I'm not going to trust Santa Claus promising me I'm going to get a new banjo for Christmas. Because I don't believe in Santa Claus to begin with. However, if somebody, I don't even know anybody rich, if some rich person promised me he was going to do this or that, if I trusted them, then I would believe it. Well, here they don't believe God because they've been given his promises. And if now they default to it's impossible, then the promise had no value to them. They sink to the depths of despair, which is easy to do once you start giving into emotions. They lifted up their voices and cried, and the people wept that night. Now, it'd probably be nice if it only lasted one night. But you get the feeling from reading through here, this is a long, drawn-out process. They actually do end up getting a crowd together that's going to go back to Egypt. And God puts a stop to that in a hurry. This spectacle that they're producing is disgraceful. I mean, if they just looked in the mirror, they would say, wait a minute. We're acting like idiots here. We're acting like little kids. Let's act mature. They're supposed to be, according to their creation of a nation, they're supposed to be a holy nation. A nation of priests. Well, is that how holy priests are supposed to act? They throwing a fit and stomping their feet and crying all night because we can't do what God promised to do? No, they're not acting like the purpose they'd been created for. Not only that, it's unjust for them to levy their accusations at Moses and Aaron. Moses and Aaron were not responsible for this whole thing. God was. God made that clear from the beginning. I'm going to do some miracles here that no man could ever do in order to prove to you I got a program and you can get on board. And that was how the nation began. Now they turn around and they say it's Moses and Aaron's fault. No, if God hadn't used Moses and Aaron, he'd have found two more. He's not limited to names. It was unjust to God. God had always done great things for them. And now for them to turn around and say Moses and Aaron have destroyed everything, it's almost like saying we're ignoring God. God's benefits are because of Moses and Aaron. No, they weren't. God's benefits are because of God. God even does the wicked good. It rains on the just as well as the unjust. His mercies were forgotten. Usually that's what happens. When we run into a bind, we forget the good times. We all boil it down to every bad thing that's ever happened. We can pick those out quickly. But it's not so easy to go back through and see God's hand give us blessings we never deserved and good things out of the blue. We don't find those as fast. So we tend to say we're having a bad day. Let me think of every other bad day I've had. That's every day I've had. It's not. You've had some good days in there. You don't put that on the scale when you're weighing things, do you? God's plan to deliver them from Egypt had been fulfilled. Now his next step was he was going to deliver them a land. Well, they wouldn't have seen their own deliverance from Egypt before God did it. What makes them think they're going to see plainly his handing them the land before it happens? Rarely does God show his hand. You know why? If God shows his hand to you, the devil sees it. Sometimes he's hiding things right until the second, so nobody can do anything, you or the devil, about it. His promises were disobeyed, and they didn't believe them. The crowds magnified the difficulties of the way, and the mob indulges in self-pity. That's a biggie, self-pity. I deserve what's right for me, all of that. We're just born wanting our own rights. And I mean, to a degree, you got some rights. But it's so tempting to magnify my right over your right. Let's say everybody's got rights. Let's say there's a handful of rights everybody's got. Everybody's got the right to eat. You should be able to eat. I mean, that produces life. You've got the right to but here's where it boils down to a problem. When there's one steak left, you got the right to eat and I got the right to eat, but I think my right is better than yours. That steak belongs to me. That's where there's a problem. That's where self-pity comes in. Me first. Murmuring puts gall, the thing they gave Jesus on the cross, puts gall and wormwood into every cup of mercy that God puts in our hand. Every day, God's doing great things for us and having mercy that we don't deserve on us. But when you start murmuring, you're mixing in something that suddenly makes that cup of cool water he's delivered to us bitter. It's murmuring. You remember when they first came out of Egypt, they found a well of water and they could not drink it. It was called Marah because it was bitter. That's bitterness. So, what do when God starts giving them a little bit of mercy here and a little bit of mercy there? That's the way God does things, little bits at a time. So, when we face the first problem, he'll give us a little bit of mercy for it. It may not be enough to get through the problem in our eyes. God knows. But he'll give us, and rather than enjoy the little bit of mercy we've been given at the moment, we set that one aside. We can come back to that after everything's done. But for right now, I'm still going to worry about what's up ahead. Okay, use the little bit of mercy he's giving you right now and don't mix any bitterness in it. It tastes better. The murmurers write the word Marah on every bill of mercy that God hands them, as though they can veto it. That's what we do. God's giving us special favors and grace and mercy in order to get through this world, because this world is nothing but tribulation. In this world you will have what? Tribulation. Okay, how do you get over it? God gives you a little bit of mercy and grace to get through each little problem, and he does it a little bit at a time, every time you walk right up to it. Before you can step off the cliff, he puts a new piece of ground under your foot. But you won't see it ahead of time. Rather than complain about the ground that's not there in the future, enjoy the piece of turf that's under your foot. All right, the next thing we'll see is in Numbers 14. Look at verse 3. This is marked disrespect. It's obvious. And wherefore hath the Lord brought us unto this land? Uh-oh. Now they've gone a step way too far. They've now moved on beyond Moses and not Elijah, Moses and Aaron, and now they're blaming God directly. Whew. It's God's fault. Now, it's easy for us to get hard on them. But if you're not careful, you'll say much the same thing. You'll say, why is God letting this happen? Because it is God. If you're a Christian, nothing happens to you that's outside of God's control. Therefore, the second you start complaining about a situation, you're complaining about God. Same thing these guys are doing right here. Why did God bring me right here? This ain't a good spot. What's he thinking? This is very wicked blasphemy, is what it really is. It's accusing God himself of error. And it's going to get worse as we go along. As if he had brought them out of bondage in Egypt. That was something they wished for when they were in bondage. Get me out of here. Wilderness sounds like a great place to go, opposed to working 24/7 for this mean Pharaoh and taskmasters. I mean, that was their freedom. However, now all of a sudden, God's at fault for giving them what they wished for a long time ago. See, he's never, you'll find this in your own life. What God does is moves way slower than we think he ought to. We think, at one point we'll think, God needs to take care of this, and this, and this. And then I'll be happy. And then life progresses, and without our noticing, he's taken care of half of those things on our list. But now life has progressed, and we've got a new list. He needs to do this, and this, and this. And without noticing the good he's already done, we say, it's not enough. I'm always in turmoil. No, you're not. Look back. See the things that you wished for a long time ago? They've been fulfilled. And if he's done that, he'll continue doing that. Problem is, he never does it fast enough. Because he's building character. He brought them out of bondage in Egypt. This suggests the kindness and the miracles of God, according to them, was simply intended to entice them into the wilderness. God's tricking us. That's what they think. He brought us out here with one thing in mind. All he wanted to do was get us out here in the middle of nowhere and just kill us. They're extreme. They didn't believe God's word. They've almost decided God's not qualified to lead them. If he's brought us all the way out here and there's no way for us to succeed from our viewpoint, we need a new leader. In fact, that's what they go on to say. They say, we'll pick somebody new and he's going to take us back to Egypt. Because that's where we were doing good. Although they don't remember when they were back there, they weren't doing too good. That's that imagination. They're now imagining their bad times were good times. I don't think I would ever want to go relive any of the events of my life. I enjoyed many. I'm an enjoyer. I enjoy every moment I'm in, I think. I mean, with very few exceptions. But I still would not want to go relive everything. I might mess it up. Even worse. Don't go back in your mind into history and try to recreate it. That's what they've done here. You know, we should have enjoyed what we had when we were in Egypt. You know, we were slaves and we had a regular paycheck and a regular job. Really? That was enjoyment? They had ingratitude for God's benefits. He says in Psalms that he daily loadeth us with benefits. Being a Christian has a great benefit in that you get benefits, plural, every day. He says daily. To all God's undeserved kindness to them, this is their response. Wherefore has the Lord brought us into this land? This is not a good land. The place we wanted to go, we can't get there, and we're stuck right here. That's not fair. Here's a little point. Blow, blow, thou winter wind. Thou art not so unkind as man's ingratitude. Thy tooth is not so keen, because thou art not seen. Although thy breath be rude, freeze, thou bitter sky, thou dost not bite so nigh, as benefits forgotten. Though thou the waters warp, thy sting is not so sharp, as friends remembered not. That's Shakespeare. I never read much of Shakespeare, but that's a fact. That's more hurtful, probably, to God, is the fact that we don't remember the great things he's already done. If you think about it, if you were God and you had done all these special things for a person, and then the one time they run into an issue and you've not dumped out special goodies on them fast enough, they suddenly are pointing their finger at you like you're unjust and can't remember all the good things you've done for them. How would that make you feel? Well, forget it. I'll show you what not helping you is like. That's the mob's motivation. Now let's see our last... No, this isn't our last point. Almost our last point. Malevolent desertion. Malevolent, that's satanic. That's evil intent. Desertion, they're leaving. Somebody's going to. Well, matter of fact, they've already left. Mentally. They already left God. They left God a long time ago. It's just becoming more and more obvious. And that's exactly what people do. If you don't have a close relationship with Jesus Christ individually, that's the only way you can have it. You can't have it corporally. You can come to church, but that doesn't give you a relationship with Jesus Christ. That might enhance it, but it doesn't give you one. You decide that on your own before you get here. These people had left God a long time ago. They left him by sending the spies in. They began to show their hand. We don't really trust him. And now it's getting more and more. They're heading down the path even more and more blatantly. Look at it in verse 3. Verse 3. It says, and, then I'm going to skip some words. And were it not better for us to return into Egypt? Go back to Egypt? That's cuckoo. That was called, in many places, the Bible refers to Egypt as the iron furnace. Really? That sound like a good place you want to go jump in? This is folly. Now let's look at the folly of this rebellion. How are they going to get back to Egypt? They didn't get to where they are in the wilderness right now, about to walk into Canaan on their own. It took some great miracles to get them where they are. How are they going to turn around and get back to Egypt? Who's going to guide them? Remember, they had a pillar and they had fire that led them the whole way. Not only that, God had to baby them the whole way. How are these big overgrown babies going to make it back to Egypt? They're not thinking too clearly. If they could have returned to Egypt, what do you think the reception's going to be like? That ain't going to be a good party. It's not going to get better. That would be way worse. They walk into Egypt. Remember what happened when they left Egypt? It said they borrowed every man from his neighbor. They walk back into Egypt. Don't you know the Egyptians are going to say, you borrowed something from me, give it back now. I don't care that you just crossed the wilderness and you're parched and, you're wore out. It doesn't matter. You borrowed something. It's mine. Give it back. You're now in my country. They're not thinking this thing through. The wickedness of this rebellion. To return back to Egypt is to go back to bondage. Now, they were in bondage in the wilderness. They're in bondage to God. Matter of fact, every man is in bondage. There's no way out of it. You serve somebody. You're a servant by nature. They served God. God has way less restrictions and anger towards you than the devil does. When they walked into Egypt, they would be put under real bondage, as if the last bondage hadn't been bad enough. They might have been free in spirit and body while they were out there in the wilderness. But now they've put their own selves under a cowardly spirit of slavery to the Egyptians that no longer exist. It's all imagination. Notice the iniquity of this rebellion. This rebellion is cruel, and it's not justifiable. They were under God Almighty. Now to rebel against Him means you only turn one place. You're either with God or you're against Him. And they've just declared as a congregation, we're the children of God, but we don't like God. Whew. That's a recipe for World War 25. All right, our last point. For something happy, we'll find Moses' direction. Good thing they've got somebody with a little bit of common sense. Moses is a great man. I would have heard this mess, and I think I would have gone and invented the machine gun. Moses puts up with these people in ways I don't think any of us could. The Bible calls him the meekest man. Well, I don't know how he maintained being meek after hearing this mess all the time. Talk about some patience, buddy. He had some patience. All right, let's find our passage. We're going to go to Deuteronomy 1, verse 29. This is going to give you a few details that are not mentioned in Numbers that are the same story. Deuteronomy 1:29. Then I said unto you, dread not, neither be afraid of them. The Lord your God, which goeth before you, He shall fight for you, according to all that He did for you in Egypt before your eyes, and in the wilderness, where thou hast seen how that the Lord thy God bare thee, as a man doth bear his son, in all the way that you went, until you came into this place. Moses gives them some exhortation, and this was much needed. He endeavors to calm them and encourage them. He uses three things that should have appealed to these people. You can use these same three things on yourself. Get that same passage in Deuteronomy, whatever problem you're facing, repeat it to yourself, put yourself in the story, and he's using three things. The first thing he's doing is he's appealing to them to be manly. I know nobody in here wants to be manly. Let's say mature. To be mature. That's right. He said, dread not, neither be afraid of them. Tell yourself that. When the problem shows up tomorrow and you don't see a way out, you can say, okay, don't be afraid. That's a them. I've got Him, and He's much bigger than them. Then he tries to motivate them. He gives them a pep rally. He says, the Lord your God, it's yours personally. Do you have God? Okay. That's bigger than anything. That trumps them all. The Lord your God, which goeth before you, He shall fight for you. You know what? You ain't been nowhere God hadn't already been. When they came through the wilderness, it says the Lord God went before them to search them out a place. Every problem you encounter, if you look close enough, you'll see His footprints are already there. He's been there and prepared the way. He's with you, and He's before you. Then He gives them a little memorial. He says, according to all that He did for you in Egypt before your eyes. That is, look back and remember the great things you've already seen. Now you can use your imagination for what's future, because that's just who God is. He didn't leave you in the past. He didn't leave you holding the bag. He took care of you. If he was going to desert you, why would he choose to do it now? He had plenty of opportunity to do it many times before. Okay? This is the pep rally he's given them. But you know what? It was to no avail. They didn't care. They'd already chosen a side. Many people are comfortable being the partner to bitterness. The scary thing about bitterness is nobody enjoys it. They hate it. However, it's addicting because it gratifies the illusion of you're important. It does. Now, Moses does something here that's great. Back to our passage in Numbers. Numbers chapter 14, verse 5. It says, "Then Moses and Aaron fell on their faces before all the assembly of the congregation of the children of Israel." That's kind of a dangerous spot to be in. These people want to kill them. And you know what they've done? They've fallen on their face. That's like turning your back to a stalking tiger. You're going to get eaten. Here Moses and Aaron fall down flat. That's pure meekness. That's no ability of myself. I'm not going to power through this and force you to do something. When human strength and human wisdom are of no avail, you'll find yourself there. Problems show up, and there's nothing humanly that you can figure out to get out of the problem. When human wisdom and strength are of no avail, when all other resources seem to fail, the godly man does what Moses did, falls on his knees in prayer, and trusts in God regardless of what he sees.